The wind swept across Wicker Park, carrying with it the promise of another cold front. Elise Brandt felt the pressure change in her bones before she heard the metal signage groan above the old brick buildings. She had navigated the Great Lakes backcountry and whiteouts, found the half-frozen missing in dense Michigan woods. But this city, this place was different. It wasn't the wilderness that swallowed Kira Holtz. It was silence. 21 years had passed since the art student vanished after a rooftop party just blocks from here. Elise hadn't known Kira, not really. She remembered the case from old flyers and the rare coverage on local cable, always a blurred photo, a red scarf, and the word missing. But now the story was circling back. Last week, a janitor renovating the long-abandoned Loft building had reached out with something strange, a broken Motorola flip phone found in a ceiling vent above the third floor. The casing was cracked, the SIM card corroded but still readable, and when the voicemail box was extracted, 6 messages remained muffled, distorted, but chilling. Elise had listened to them in a sound lab at Northwestern. The first was an argument female voice, desperate, maybe crying. The third had a male voice tight with anger. One contained nothing but slow, rhythmic footsteps across a tiled floor. But it was the 6th message, the whisper through static, that clung to her. "It's not him." That was the phrase that wouldn't let go. It undermined everything that had been assumed: the jealous boyfriend, the party fight, the drunken walk into the cold. If it wasn't Zane, who was it? Now she stood where Kira had last been seen, on the rooftop of a crumbling walk-up. Pigeons roosted where art students once drank wine from thermoses. The railing was missing. A scaffolding pole leaned against the far wall, rusty and wind-bent. Elise imagined the night of the disappearance music echoing between warehouses, cheap floodlights hung from tripods, Kira moving through it all with restless eyes and too many people watching. The sky was turning leaden. A low thrum from the L train rolled past the park like distant thunder. Elise took out her notebook and ran her hand along the lip of the vent beside the rooftop stairwell. The opening was too narrow for someone to fall through, but just wide enough for someone to shove something in. The janitor had claimed he found the phone while clearing out soot and insulation. He hadn't known it belonged to a missing girl until the SIM pinged back to a long-defunct second number registered to Zane Keller, Kira's boyfriend, and the man who had claimed he left the party after their argument before Kira vanished. Elise closed her eyes and listened. The air whispered down the vent shaft like breath through teeth. She remembered something an old mentor had told her after her first recovery. It's not the wilderness that hides them. It's the people who stop looking. She opened her notebook. Began again. The Loft building on North Damon Avenue had once been a print studio, then a photo co-op, and then a decaying skeleton left behind by the early 2000s exodus of artists priced out of the neighborhood. Now the third floor was a hollow shell, paint-peeling corridors, blistered wood beneath a thin crust of dust, and windows rimed with frost on the inside, as if the building itself had exhaled and never inhaled again. Elise stood in the wide, dim room where the party had taken place. Light filtered through cracked panes, fractured and pale. Footsteps echoed behind her, her own slowed and cautious, each shift of her weight stirring debris long undisturbed. She scanned the walls, noting the discoloration near a vent grating unusually high, framed in brittle dust. A soft draft passed through it, one that had no business flowing in an abandoned building sealed years ago. She walked toward it slow. The chemical smell came first, faint but distinct. Fixer, silver halide, old developer. It pulled her back to the dark room at Ferris State, her hands in rubber gloves, watching an image fade into being like a ghost rising through fog. That smell lingered only when something had been spilled or sealed. The old blueprints of the building had shown an auxiliary room connected to the third-floor lab by ductwork and a fire door. But in the most recent renovation documents, there was no mention of the room at all, which meant someone had erased it. Elise knelt and unscrewed the vent cover, revealing not just airflow, but a narrow tunnel behind the wall, insulated with cotton batting film canisters and warped negatives scattered like confetti. One bore Kira's name on the plastic sleeve. Elise held it to the window. The emulsion had bled with age, but the shape was clear. A girl head turned, standing in silhouette against a tripod-mounted camera. Her back was to the lens, but her posture, it was tense. Waiting, not posing. She glanced at the vent again, too narrow for someone to crawl through directly. But what if there was another access point? A maintenance corridor. An old chute. The smell grew sharper as she pulled away from the wall. Not rot, not mold. Memory. Something was hidden, not by time, but by intent. Elise marked the vent with chalk and made her way back into the stairwell. She would return, with tools, with light, with questions sharpened like blades. Behind her, the cold pressed its face to the glass. Inside, the air didn't move, but in the vent, something had once breathed. The winter of 1998 had been punishing one of the coldest on record. Snow clung to fire escapes and telephone lines like calcified coral. That night, January 16th, the sky over Wicker Park was clear, the air sharp as broken glass. You could hear voices from blocks away as sound bounced off frozen brick and frost-warped metal. That was the night Kira Holtz walked away from a rooftop party and was never seen again. Elise sat across from Zane Keller in a nondescript diner 2 miles from the old Loft. He looked older than his age, gray, creeping into a beard that had once been fashionable, now overgrown. His hands trembled when he reached for the coffee cup. He didn't ask why Elise had called. He knew. "I told them everything back then," he said, barely above a whisper. "They didn't believe me. I left before she disappeared." "You argued?" Elise replied, voice level. Loudly. Witnesses remembered that part. Zane gave a slow nod. She was scared. Not of me. Of Dorn. The professor. Elise waited. Zane glanced toward the window. She wouldn't say what happened, but she wanted out. Out of the program. Said someone was watching her. Said she had proof. But when I pressed, she shut down. We fought. I walked. Elise studied him. His eyes stayed on the snow drifting sideways outside. Regret there, yes. But not panic. And not guilt. At least not for the thing that mattered. "Why didn't you ever tell anyone about her suspicions?" "Because she'd asked me not to. Said if I said anything, he'd know." Dorn. She was sure of it. Elise nodded slowly. "You had a second phone line back then. Registered in your name." Zane blinked. Yeah. For my gallery side work. I lent it to her sometimes. She'd use it when she didn't want anyone tracing her. That detail matched the SIM card's origin. The phone in the vent was once his. She said she was going to meet someone that night, Zane added. Didn't say who, but it wasn't me. Across the city, Elise later met Mia Travers in a walk-up studio crowded with canvases. Mia didn't cry. She folded and unfolded a turpentine-stained rag in her lap, never looking Elise in the eye. "She was brilliant," Mia murmured. "Too good." Dorn paid attention to her. That changed everything. "Were you jealous?" Elise asked. Mia flinched. "Of course I was. But I didn't hurt her. I left the party before midnight." She stayed, and Dorn Mia's mouth went flat. He stayed. Always stayed late. Outside, the light was failing. Elise felt the cold pressing in again. Not from the weather, but from the absences in their stories. Everyone had left. No one had stayed with Kira. The lab tech at the Forensic Audio Center had done what he could. 5 of the 6 voicemails recovered from the corroded phone were heavily degraded compressed audio artifacts, distortion from battery acid and time. But Elise didn't need crystal clarity to feel what they carried. She sat alone in the soundproof booth, headphones tight, playback cued. Message 1. A woman's voice rising and clipped Zane. "Stop!" I said, "No, I just listened to me. Stop recording. Cut." Static swallowed the rest. Message 2. A low male voice. Calm, rehearsed. "You think anyone's going to believe you? You're a dropout with a camera." Tone clinical. Cold, not angry. Collected. Message 3. A woman again. Kira harsher. "I know what you're doing." "I saw it. I'm not the first. I'm not going to be the next." Message 4. Nothing but footsteps. soft, slow, echoing on tile. A door creaks, then a breath. A metallic click. Message 5. A scream. Raw, muffled by distance and metal. Help me. Is someone there? It ended in a clang. Maybe a vent shutting. Or something heavier. Message 6. Just a whisper. Close to the mic, but laced with fear. It's not him. Elise sat in the dark breath, held the hiss of the booth's silence pressing like a fist against her skull. That last message didn't sound like Kira. The cadence was different. The tone, calmer, almost resigned. It wasn't warning, it was clarification. She stepped out of the booth. The tech, a quiet, sharp-eyed woman named Jay, looked up from the console. You hear it too? Jay asked. Elise nodded. Any idea where those footsteps were recorded? Jay shrugged. Sound bounces, but linoleum or tile. Small room, maybe underground. Listen to the echo tail, it's short. Like a sealed lab or basement corridor. Elise filed that away. The Loft's old photo lab was exactly that, a blacked-out room with concrete walls, no windows, and a single exhaust vent running above the drop ceiling. Could the scream travel through ductwork? Jay leaned back. If the phone's mic was up against metal, yeah, especially if it dropped down a vent. It lined up. A device hidden in panic. A final message murmured in fear. Back at her apartment, Elise played the 6th voicemail again on loop through headphones and without distraction. It's not him. Whoever said it knew Kira's assumptions were wrong. Whoever said it may have been with her in the dark, or in the wall. Not Zane. Not Mia. Someone else had been there. And the scream. It hadn't been a moment of death. It had been a moment of discovery. The first thing Elise noticed when she stepped into Professor Dorn's townhouse was the absence of sound. Not silence, true absence. No ticking clock, no street noise, no music bleeding from a neighbor's wall. Just thick carpeted stillness and the faint scent of old paper and vinegar. Dorn greeted her with the calm, oily politeness of a man used to scrutiny. He had the careful hands of someone who spent his life handling fragile things. A camera sat on a shelf behind him, vintage like a chrome, dulled by decades of fingerprints. You're investigating a girl who disappeared 20 years ago, he said, gesturing toward the leather chair opposite him. What a strange hobby. She was one of yours, Elise replied. Dorn smiled thinly. They were all mine in a way. Some thought that meant power. I saw it as curation. Elise didn't react. Let the silence stretch. You taught Kira Holtz in her final semester, she continued. She never submitted her final project. She dropped out, Dorn said. Had a breakdown, lost focus. You've seen the type. I've seen the type who cause breakdowns. Dorn didn't flinch. He leaned forward, hands steepled. You're not police. Why are you really here? Elise pulled a photograph from her folder, one of the degraded negatives she'd found behind the vent. She slid it across the table. The image Kira turned away, standing in soft light beside a camera tripod. Her shoulders were hunched. A shadow crossed her back, unclear and looming. This wasn't submitted with her portfolio, Elise said, but it was taken with studio equipment you checked out the week she disappeared. Dorn stared at the photo a long time, not shocked, not angry, thoughtful. She wanted to document something he said. She thought she'd discovered a pattern claimed some of her classmates were being manipulated. She called it a transactional chain. Accusations without substance. Dangerous to reputations. She said she had proof. Dorn's eyes met hers. Calm, measured. Did she? Elise didn't answer. She noticed a binder behind him labeled Spring 98, archived negs. Dorn followed her gaze. Would you like to see them? He offered. They went downstairs into a room colder than the rest of the house. Dark room sinks, dust-covered enlargers, chemical stains on the counters. Dorn pulled the binder down. Inside were dozens of sleeve pages ordered meticulously. Toward the back, another photo of Kira. This time closer. Her expression unreadable. her hand mid-motion as if trying to block the lens. This one, Elise said quietly, wasn't in the university archives. Dorn closed the binder. Some images don't belong to the institution. Elise felt her pulse shift. Beneath Dorn's civility was certainty, the kind that comes only from knowing something terrible can't be proven. Not yet. Outside, sleet began to tap against the basement window. Inside, the temperature dropped another degree. The abandoned loft had changed in the past week. Elise could feel it. Not visibly, there were still broken folding chairs, paint-chipped railings, the ghost of an artist's vision long since swallowed by rent hikes and time. But something in the air had shifted. The silence was charged like a storm hovering just beyond the horizon. She returned to the third floor with tools, a narrow inspection camera, and LED headlamp bolt cutters. The vent opening above the wall bore her chalk mark from before, barely smudged. No one had touched it. Yet. She unscrewed the cover and inserted the camera cable. The tiny light at the end flickered, then settled into focus. Beyond the vent, an old metal duct only half concealed by a frame of plaster. The camera tip traced the length of the passage, straight, narrow, running toward what should have been a sealed wall. But the thermal sensor flicked briefly into yellow near the far end. Warm air. Not possible. Not here. Not unless something or someone was leaking heat on the other side. Elise followed the vent trail on the building's outdated blueprints. It terminated at a utility service corridor that, according to the renovation permit in 2002, had been closed after a minor gas leak. But that same corridor was part of the original darkroom system, an area left unrenovated due to asbestos concerns, never reopened. She found the entrance on the first floor behind a chain-locked fire door painted over at least twice. The hinges groaned as she clipped through the rusted links. Inside, pitch-black dead air, the sour, sweet scent of age and neglect. She flicked on her headlamp. A narrow hallway stretched into shadow, the floor strewn with broken tape reels, blank film canisters, and the collapsed skeleton of a portable backdrop rig. Every few steps, red paint flecks clung to the walls like dried blood. But it wasn't paint. It was darkroom light sealant, scraped, peeled, flaked away over time. Elise reached the end of the corridor. A reinforced metal door stood before her, no handle, no lock. Just a solid panel sealed tight. She pressed her gloved hand against the edge. Warmth. Faint, but there. Not from a person. From something electrical. A space still insulated. Behind that door was the photo lab. And behind that lab possibly was the truth of what happened to Kira Holtz. Elise backed away, breathing shallowly. A claustrophobic chill traced her spine, not from fear of what she might find, but from the gnawing sense that someone years ago had intended this room never be reopened. And someone had agreed. She returned to the light, marked the door, and whispered to no one in particular, "She's in there." The darkness said nothing back. His name was Arlo Becker, and for 23 years he had cleaned the floors, changed the bulbs, and ignored the sounds he was paid not to hear. Elise found him at the service entrance behind the loft, pushing a cart of rusted tools toward a dumpster too full to close. He was small, hunched from decades of lifting things no one else wanted to touch. When she approached, he didn't flinch, just squinted at her through cataract-clouded eyes. "I remember you," he said, voice dry as paper. "You came about the phone." She nodded. "You found it in the vent." "I said I did." She waited. Arlo looked past her to the alley wall where graffiti bled under old flyers warped by rain. "It wasn't just in the vent," he said eventually. "It fell from it. I was cleaning above the stairwell. Popped a ceiling tile, something clattered out, hit my shoulder." He rubbed the spot absently, as if still bruised. "Did you listen to the messages?" He gave a slow nod. "One. That scream. I had heard it before, when Arlo swallowed. Night after the party. I was closing up, heard banging in the ceiling, like a trapped bird. Then a voice, faint, screaming. I thought it was a prank. You knew someone was up there." "No," he said sharply. Then softer, "I thought it was over. Place was always full of noise. Parties shoots late-night students. I told myself someone else would deal with it. I left. Locked up. And you didn't say anything. Arlo looked down at his hands, cracked and yellowed. I had a record. Petty stuff. They'd have blamed me. So you said nothing, even when she disappeared. His voice was barely audible. There were cops, posters, then nothing. People moved on. Place closed. I thought, if they didn't find her, maybe I was wrong. Elise stepped closer. Were you? His silence was answer enough. He opened his tool cart, pulled out an old ring of keys dusted with lint and corrosion. You're looking for the sealed lab, he said. It's got a drop lock. I couldn't get in. Nobody could not without bolt shears or this. He placed the key in her palm. Cold, heavy, the kind that didn't come from a hardware store, the kind made once, then hidden. I'm sorry, he said, voice cracking. Elise nodded once. She didn't offer forgiveness. She wasn't here to unburden him. She was here to open a door. And behind that door, a voice once screamed for help, and no one answered. The lock resisted at first, groaning under rust and memory. Then, with a crack like old bone, the bolt turned. Elise braced herself and pushed. The dark room door opened inward, releasing a breath of air that hadn't moved in decades, stale and chemical, with a sour sweetness that clung to her throat like gauze. Her headlamp pierced the blackness, cutting through floating dust like snow in reverse. The room was intact. An old enlarger loomed like a rusted sentinel in the corner. Film reels dangled from hooks. The wash basin overflowed with dust, the developer trays dry and rimmed in black crust. On a far table sat a box of Polaroid film bloated with age, one photo curled outward like a claw. Elise stepped in. The air was heavy, more than just abandonment. It was presence, the kind that still hung after panic, after desperation. On the far wall, drag marks, 2 parallel streaks across the concrete leading to a battered metal cabinet beneath the ventilation shaft. Elise crouched. The cabinet was unlocked. Inside, nothing, but the marks on the floor fresh in comparison to the rest of the room. Someone had been moved, or hidden. The dust here had been disturbed recently. Days ago, maybe. Not 20 years. She turned to the center of the room. The tripod stood exactly as it had in the negative, its legs extended, its head aimed downward. A stage light beside it was shattered cord wrapped loosely around its base like a noose. Above the enlarger, a Polaroid nailed to the wall. Elise walked to it slowly. The image was warped by heat, but clear enough. A girl, Kira face, caught mid-motion, mouth open, eyes wide. She was not posing. She was reacting. A shadow loomed beside her shoulder. Behind her, the edge of the ventilation shaft. The timestamp had been scratched out. Elise's fingers trembled as she removed the photo. Beneath the nail carved into the wall, a single word: listen. The room groaned around her, not from structure but from memory. Echoes seeped into her bones. This wasn't where Kira lived her last moments. This was where she waited. Elise followed the shaft with her eyes. It ran above the ceiling, looping back toward the original duct path. But something about it was wrong, the airflow too strong for a sealed room. There had to be another chamber, a secondary crawl space, a place sound had traveled from. Elise turned off her headlamp. Let the darkness settle in. Let herself listen. Somewhere in the walls she heard the faint rattle of air. Not mechanical. Breath. She wasn't alone in the lab. And maybe back then Kira hadn't been either. The vent above groaned. Just once. A shift of air or metal or something inside it. Elise froze. The darkness wasn't total. Her headlamp still cast a soft white cone catching the dust mid-air, but around her the shadows gathered, thickened. She turned slowly toward the noise. The shaft she'd crawled earlier where the phone had fallen ran along the ceiling above, and now in this room from the inside, she could see what the blueprint never showed: a welded hatch bolted from the outside. A maintenance panel that sealed off the final segment of duct. That was the path the voice had traveled, the one that carried the scream, the footsteps, the whisper. And below that shaft, Elise now saw the tiles were scratched. Not randomly, but in straight lines. Back and forth. Hundreds of them. Like something or someone had been sliding something heavy over time. The floor beneath was grooved with frantic marks made by hands. Fingernails, maybe. Bones. There had been another room. Her breath caught in her chest. Then a click. The overhead vent snapped shut. Metal slammed above, and the lights went out. Elise spun headlamp flickering her back against the wall. She felt it now, not just the absence of someone, but the arrival. Someone else was here. Footsteps. Not hurried, not frantic. Careful. They came from the far side of the lab where the cabinet had stood. Someone had been watching, waiting. "Did you listen to the message?" a voice asked, calm. Too calm. Male. Older. Familiar. Dorn. "I wondered when you'd come," he continued. She said someone would. Someone who wouldn't let go. Elise said nothing. Let the silence fill in the shape of his madness. "She came here the night after the party," Dorn said. "Said she had the negatives. Said if I didn't confess she'd go to the dean, but I'd already prepared the room. You locked her in. She crawled into the shaft. I warned her. She said she'd record me, expose everything, so I made sure no one heard." Elise stepped sideways toward the door, but it clicked behind her. Bolted. "You think I buried her in the walls?" Dorn said. "I didn't. She was clever. She left messages. That phone, it wasn't for help, it was insurance." "Then where is she?" Elise's voice was dry. Dorn stepped into the dim beam of her failing headlamp. "In here." His hand moved. Something glinted. Elise lunged backward as metal caught her shoulder. Pain bloomed sharp and immediate. A utility blade. Serrated, close-range weapon. He'd used it before. She hit the cabinet, grasped the tripod with blood-slick fingers, and swung. The metal cracked against his temple. Dorn staggered, fell. She didn't hesitate. Slammed the tripod down again and again, until the lab fell silent once more, except for the vent, where faintly wind whispered through. Not breath, not memory, but release. The silence after violence is always uneven. The world doesn't resume at once, it creeps back in frame by frame like a film reel jammed in the projector. Elise stood over Dorn's collapsed body, the tripod dented and bloodied in her grip. Her shoulder burned, his blade had opened a gash high and deep, and warm blood soaked the sleeve of her jacket. But the pain was distant. She could still move. She could still search. Dorn was alive, breathing shallowly, unconscious or faking. Elise didn't care. She used her scarf as a crude sling and wedged the tripod handle through the door's bolt housing, locking it in place. No one else was coming in. More importantly, Dorn wasn't getting out. Then she turned back to the room. In the chaos, something had come loose. The edge of the floorboard beneath the developing sink had shifted when she'd slammed him against it. A crack of black against the concrete gray. Elise dropped to her knees and pried at the seam. The wood lifted with effort, revealing a hollow pocket beneath. Inside, a tarp-wrapped bundle. Heavy. Cold. She unwrapped it with trembling hands. A body bag. It had been sealed in darkness for 2 decades. Time had pressed everything down to stillness, but there was no mistaking it. Bone. Hair. Fabric fibers that matched the red scarf in Kira's missing person photo. In the pocket of the decomposed jacket, a shattered digital recorder. Crushed. Erased. But not before one voicemail had been sent. Elise reached further into the pocket. Pulled out a second Polaroid, this one nearly pristine. Kira again. Same room, same expression. But in this one, someone else was behind the camera. Dorn reflected in a mirror just out of frame. Shirtless, hands in frame, smiling. Predator. Archivist. Elise leaned against the wall and breathed deep through the pain. He hadn't just blackmailed students. He had posed them, manipulated them, captured fear as art. But Kira had known. She'd fought back, hidden proof, left messages. She had sealed her own evidence in a vent, knowing someone might one day find it. Someone like Elise. She rose, heart thudding, pulled out her phone, dialed the precinct. "I need an evidence team. Possible homicide. 1 suspect in custody. Location 320 North Damon, 3rd floor." The dispatcher asked a question Elise barely heard. Her eyes drifted back to the Polaroid, to Kira's outstretched hand frozen mid-motion as if pushing the lens away, as if warning whoever came next. Not Zane, not Mia. It had always been Dorn. The voicemail had been right. It's not him. It took 7 minutes for the officers to arrive. Elise sat by the door, shoulder bandaged with strips of gauze. From her first aid kit, knees tucked to her chest, the Polaroid clutched in her hand. Dorn moaned once in his half-conscious heap beside the overturned sink, but she didn't look at him again. Let him bleed. The police found her exactly where she'd told them she would be. One officer recoiled at the smell inside the sealed lab. The other dropped to a knee beside the tarp-wrapped remains. They didn't speak until the paramedics arrived. Elise handed over the recorder and the photos. She said nothing about the voicemail files or the negative sleeves she'd already scanned. That would come later, in the hospital under a bright white light and the sterile hush of after-midnight triage. Elise closed her eyes and listened again to memory, not tape. She could still hear Kira's scream. Not the sound itself, but what it carried. The intention of it. Kira had been trapped, but she hadn't stopped fighting. She had screamed through a vent no one checked, left a phone no one found, scratched floors no one cleaned. And even as the world silenced her, she insisted on being heard. She wasn't alone in the dark. Elise asked to see Zane the following afternoon. He arrived at the hospital guarded and pale. She was trying to tell me, he said, hands clasped tight as if praying. But I was too angry, too hurt. I thought she was pushing me away. She was, Elise replied quietly. But not because of you. She was trying to protect you. Zane didn't cry. His expression didn't crack, but something deep behind his eyes broke a permanent fissure. Mia's been questioned, Elise added. She didn't lie. She was jealous. But she left the party early. Dorn stayed. He staged the shoot afterward. Zane nodded. He used his position. Always did. People whispered about it. But no one wanted to confront him. Faculty, students, everyone knew, and no one listened. Elise didn't blame him. Not directly. But the silence had come from all directions. The DA built the case quickly. Dorn had kept logs, receipts, even blackmail letters. Evidence piled like negatives in a darkroom drawer, waiting to be exposed. The body, the photos, the confessions, all of it aligned. But one thing never quite resolved. The final voicemail. It's not him. Audio forensics later revealed the voice didn't match Kira. It was another woman, unidentified. Elise knew what that meant. Kira hadn't been Dorn's only victim. She was just the one who refused to disappear quietly. Justice for Kira Holtz would come through the courts. Dorn would face trial for aggravated homicide, unlawful imprisonment, and the long, slow horrors of systemic abuse disguised as art. But the true justice Elise Brandt believed would come in ensuring that Kira's refusal to vanish her scream, her phone, her evidence was not buried a second time. Elise testified, not just about the photos or the floor scratches or Dorn's attack in the darkroom. She testified about the silence, how it spreads, how it roots itself not in malevolence but in convenience. The silence of a janitor who didn't want to be blamed, a boyfriend who thought he wasn't worth trusting, a student too envious to intervene, a faculty that had long accepted rumors as background noise. At sentencing, Elise sat alone. No family appeared for Dorn. None were left for Kira. Only the press came crowding the hallway with lenses pointed at courtroom doors. Fitting in the end that it would be cameras, the very instruments of her exploitation, that would now document her justice. Dorn pled guilty. The courtroom was quiet when they led him away. No outbursts, no applause, just the rustle of jackets and the faint squeak of chain on linoleum. Later, Elise visited the newly installed memorial at the Loft building. The structure had been purchased by an arts nonprofit and converted into a center for creative trauma recovery. The old dark room had been sealed permanently, its door welded shut. A plaque rested beside it. For those who screamed and those who listened too late. She placed a single photo at the base. Kira restored, smiling in a candid shot Elise had found in the archives taken weeks before her disappearance. Nothing posed. Just sunlight whined through her hair paint on her fingers. Elise stood alone as moonlight filtered through the boarded windows. The air was cold again. The wind passed down the alleys like breath through cracked teeth. She made a silent promise. To never mistake absence for escape. To never confuse quiet for peace. To keep listening. She had spent a lifetime preparing for difficult journeys, and this, perhaps the most important one of all, would be faced with the same resilience and determination that had guided her for decades. As she stepped back into the street, the L train rumbled past, carving through the cold city like a signal flare. And somewhere in the wind, Elise imagined a voice not screaming but singing, not trapped, but finally heard.
Thank you for listening to Brody's Stories. Until we meet again.